Kia ora koutou katoa. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Before I get started, I'd just like to acknowledge Elena Farraha and Liz Horn from Countdown, who went on this journey with me. Sadly, they can't be here on stage with me today, but they're as much a part of this talk as they were on the project. This lovely picture, which I drew myself, is a high-level view of the journey I'm going to talk you through today. I'm going to cover a bunch of stuff about what we learned around how consumers think, shop, and research online. And I'm also going to take you on a little detour, but I'm sure it will be worth your time. This photo was taken in 1996. Which is the same year that Countdown launched its online shopping site, making it one of the first e-commerce websites in New Zealand. Fast forward 20 plus years and you'd hardly recognise that one from the one you see today. Much like me, it's changed, evolved, expanded, and spawned many new features. But also, like me, there's some original features buried in there, one of which is their product categorisation schema, which is the way that products are structured on the website. When Elena and I first began looking at the product categorisation schema, it was obvious that it wasn't right and wasn't optimal. To start with, there were 26 categories at level 1. So the first step of your browsing experience was really overwhelming, and site performance reinforced this. When we looked at the analytics, we were pretty shocked. Typically, e-commerce behaviour is more browse than search, somewhere between 70 to 85%, although, like everything with UX, it depends. We found that this browsing dominance was the same with Woolworths, where more than half of their customers were browsing. In stark contrast, Countdown users were only browsing 7%. When we looked below the 26 level 1 categories, we found that the number of categories had bloated to more than 6,000. And now, considering that it's actually only around 10,000 products in any one Countdown store, the number of categories to products was pretty odd. There was also no consistent structure or breakdown within the taxonomies below in the lower levels, probably because it was maintained by the more than 60 category managers that Countdown employs. So we obviously had to choose between 26 options at level 1, but within those options, they really varied greatly in specificity. There was a category called breakfast foods, which mainly contained things like cereals, but also bacon and eggs. In contrast, there was a category called meal ingredients. Except that those meal ingredients didn't include fruit, vegetables, meat, canned or baking products. It was basically the miscellaneous food category. And customer feedback was pretty poor. So there was our burning platform. We had categories that were over 20 years old, bloated, confusing, inconsistent, and performing well below expected. Elena and I established some goals for the product category overhaul. We wanted to simplify the categories and reduce the number of choices. We also wanted to standardise the taxonomy and make it more consistent. And we also wanted to modernise our language so that it better reflected customer needs and usage. We also wanted to develop some governing principles so that we could make sure that the integrity of the schema was maintained over time, And we're hopeful that this is something you can apply in your own work. So during discovery, we sought to understand how customers mentally group their shopping. We did some card sorting, in person and online. Shout out to Optimal Workshop. And we learnt some really interesting things about how people group their shopping list. So, taking the plunge into audience participation, I'm going to ask you to shout out some ways that you group your own shopping list. And if you're listening online, you can type them into the Slack channel. By where they're located in the store, 100%. Say again. You don't group it at all? You and my husband. Fruit and veggies first. Bacon and eggs second. Meat third. It's a very good plan. Bacon and then meat. We'll come back to that. What about online? Have we got anything different? By aisle and snacks. Well done, everybody. Great participation. Thank God that worked. All right. So we learned that the most common way that people group their shopping lists is by type of food. Fruit and veg, meat, bread, that sort of thing. But also location in the home, whether that's the kitchen, the laundry, the bathroom. There were also other models like usage. I use it for baking, I use it for cleaning. The temperature, it's cold, it's frozen. The cost, whether it's staples or treats or snacks. Where you would find it in the store, and also some specific dietary needs. Where you would find it in the store is a really interesting one because there are a group of people out there who write their shopping list in the exact order that they're going to walk the supermarket. Kudos to those people. But many of those models were quite specific to the individual customer and therefore fairly subjective. So we developed our first principle, which was that we would support the primary mental models, which was, in our case, food type and location in the store. In the home, sorry. Once we had a clear picture of customer mental models, we began to develop our new schema. Step one was to compare Countdown with another company within our group, Woolworths. We took the same 20 products and got some really good insights. For instance, bacon and eggs is a silly thing to have under breakfast foods. Only 5% of customers could find streaky bacon under breakfast foods. We also identified that Woolies' schema had its own issues, which was a good reminder not to assume that someone else has it right. Where they did perform better, though, was in speed. Customers were able to succeed or fail faster because it was easier for them to choose a first step in the browse process, which led us to principle number 2, that less is more. I know, it's pretty obvious, but that paradox of choice is that if you give people too many things to choose from, it's harder for them to make any choice. We tried to implement this by limiting the number of choices at any one level to 12 max. We did have to put some flex in that. So we determined that our new schema would be primarily based on food type and location, and we moved into definition, dove into it. We did a market review and determined there was no perfect fit out there for Countdown. So taking what we'd learned, market inspiration, and a fair amount of gut feel, we set about developing a new schema. And I'll be honest with you, what that meant was a lot of time in front of my computer with 20 different tabs open going, where do you put a smoke alarm? Is that a small appliance or security? Skip to the end, it's neither of those things. What we wanted to do with our first round of tree testing was really optimize the level 1 categories, make sure that we had that right. And we also developed about half of the tree right through to level 3. As a real test of less is more, we wanted to improve on the original structure of having 3 categories for drinks, wine and beer, and cider. We compared splitting those into 2 categories against having a parent category of drinks with beer and wine underneath, because you drink them. We found that drinks was not really specific enough for what people were looking for, but splitting them fragmented some of the results. When we made a simple label change to drinks, beer and wine, performance shot up to 92%. However, for trading reasons, we weren't legally able to combine those categories. Oh well. We also had a big realization that some products belong in more than one place. Coming back to bacon, we wanted to retest it under a new location of deli and chilled. And what we found was that bacon had a bimodal distribution. About as many people expected to find it in the deli as expected to find it with the pork. And there were other examples of this as well. For example, organic carrots needed to be with the regular carrots, but also in an organic category. While we aimed for all of our products to have a mutually exclusive location, we recognised that some things needed to be in more than one category. So we aimed for a single and identify the exceptions. If you're wondering about where they would, how we got to bacon and deli and chilled, it was because we found that participants would often comment about where they would find it in store. That spatial awareness that people used for orientation became really helpful, and we would often have participants comment that they would expect to find things, near the yogurts or next to the seafood. I didn't draw that prawn, by the way. I downloaded it from Prawn Hub. I'm so sorry. So we found that it was actually quite useful to reflect in-store patterns for hard-to-place products. We also learnt a lot about using common names. Technically, a soft drink is anything non-alcoholic, whether or not it's carbonated. But to us Kiwis, a soft drink is a fizzy drink. So a soft drinks category wouldn't have worked for juice or water. And we had other categories where there was mixed understanding of a name. For example, what is a condiment? Tomato sauce, chili sauce, mustard, sure. But what about relish or pickle? Or pickled onions or gherkins? We found that we needed to make sure we were using names that were commonly understood and not just book definitions. We also learnt that clues can be helpful. For example, when we tested soft cheeses, we found that we could improve performance by people being able to place products in the category by just renaming it cream cheese, cottage cheese, and soft cheese. And the same thing when we compared stone fruit with peaches, plums, and stone fruit. So cues can bring clarity about what's in a category. The last takeaway from the first round of tree testing really reinforced that the food type mental model is dominant. We had this hypothesis that world foods isn't useful in a digital context. The products in this category are typically either cuisine, so Japanese, Mexican, Thai, or confectionery and snack foods from a particular country, whether that's the UK or South Africa. So what we did was we asked people in our tree testing, where would you expect to find butter chicken sauce? And I can tell you that no one looked in the world foods category. They all went straight to the sources. And it was a similar story for taco shells. Now, this was actually a bit of a controversial move for Countdown, but the results were so compelling we were able to challenge the status quo and get this across the line. Armed with the results and the new principles we were developing, we built out the remainder of the tree. We were focused on removing generic categories, and it was while looking at personal care I came across something that turned into a bit of a crusade for me, and the biggest example in my lifetime of challenging the status quo. We're about to take a little detour and talk about periods. Yeah, I know. So, looking below the subcategories of personal care, I found that there was a personal and sanitary products category. Now, I've always had an issue with term sanitary products and feminine hygiene. They just have this connotation of being dirty. But I quickly discovered how ubiquitous these terms are. They're literally everywhere, worldwide, and in other languages. Let's take a closer look at that language. Sanitary relates to sewage facilities and drinking water. I did a Google image search on sanitary products this morning, by the way, and the first two filters were ceramic and toilets. Hygiene is about preventing disease through cleanliness. And women's health? Do periods make us sick? Do periods make us healthy? Don't even get me started on feminine. I mean, quick show of hands, who's ever felt more feminine because they've got their period? That would be nobody. But let's be really clear here. The presence or absence of a period does not make you more feminine. And it's really important, particularly this week, that we recognise that not all females menstruate and not all menstruators are female. These are all euphemisms dancing around something that is completely normal, and they perpetuate that menstruation is dirty and not to be talked about. There's a huge amount of stigma and shame around periods, but at the same time a groundswell of support for making it okay to talk about menstruation. I felt that getting rid of euphemisms and normalising period talk would be a small step towards removing some of that stigma. As a mum of two beautiful girls, I want them to be comfortable talking about and dealing with their periods, and their brother too, for that matter. I distinctly remember feeling humiliated as a teenager, getting my period unexpectedly and having to deal with it with wadded up toilet paper. And what was occasional for me is normal for thousands and thousands who have to deal with period poverty. And this is a topic that Countdown cares about and has tried to combat with a range of low-cost period products. I made the case that changing their language strongly aligned with their values. But back to product categories. Considering various options, we determined if you can have skincare and you can have hair care, why not period care? But we knew that it would be confronting for some people, so we set about building a case for change. Using the product categorisation schema as the main communications tool, we introduced the business to period care. We set the context and importance for this change, backed by evidence and anecdotes. We even had tampons that exploded like fireworks. Sorry, not sorry. Crucially, we also played it as a fait accompli. We said that it was something that would happen right from the word go, and quietly waited for someone to strongly object. Part of the evidence came from including period care in our tree testing. Firstly, it performed incredibly well, with 85% success. Of the 1,300 participants who placed that product, only 20% felt the need to comment. And mostly, over 2/3 said that was easy, as you can see from those verbatims. There were a couple of dozen people out of 1,300 who preferred a different label, and that's completely understandable. We just knew that we would have to do a bit of education around the launch. Within Countdown, I was completely blown away by the universal support for this move at every level of the organisation. The first member of the exec that I presented this to was Sally Copeland, who's currently acting MD at Countdown. And she gave us the endorsement, but also the confidence to move forward across the business. This is the official period emoji, by the way, which launched last year. Get using it. So now we're going to join back up with the PCS story. We completed the new schema, did more rounds of research, iterated, and got to a happy place. And then we began socializing across the business. Liz, Elena, and I were vocal champions of the product category story, but we wanted it to take on a life of its own. We felt that the more people understood the need for change and invested in the outcome, the greater the chance of success. Liz in particular worked tirelessly in dozens of meetings and hallway conversations across quite an extended period of time to ensure that people continued to see the value and to make sure that the work got prioritised. We started by socialising with key stakeholders and then did a bit of a roadshow across the business, taking in the category managers, boy, that was a hard sell, members of the exec, our tribe, and many other areas of the business. There were a couple of false starts due to some critical dependencies, but eventually our persistence paid off, and we went live earlier this year with 12 level 1 categories and a seasonal category, which just goes to show that persistence beats resistance, and I think that's something that any of us can apply to our work. So I'm sure you'd like to hear what the results were. Over the course of the project, we spoke to 3,000 customers, around 6 rounds of research, and we also engaged with dozens of team members. We reduced the product categories by 90%. And when we launched them, it went incredibly smoothly. We kept waiting for an influx of complaints that never eventuated. The proportion of browse has more than doubled, even though, and hopefully this will happen soon, we made no other changes to the UI or interaction design. And there's been a 91% uplift in add to cart from the browse pages. We went live with period incontinence care, and at the last moment, we made the decision to change the intimate hygiene category to genital washes and wipes. This was a world first for supermarkets and caught the attention of local and international media. Customer feedback was positive, along with a fair few people and Reddit followers who said, "So what? Of course. This should have been done ages ago." To which I say, hallelujah. It was great validation that we'd made the right choice. I also particularly enjoyed this quote from a chap who emailed in after launch suggesting that we rename the area of the supermarket to be the menstruation station. Shout out to David Dylan Thomas, because that might be the only thing you remember about this talk because it rhymes. And the big finish. I'm really proud to tell you that period care has now been rolled out nationwide, in store, wherever there's signage. And Woolworths are considering following suit. So we're almost at the end of the journey. I just want to leave you with one final thought, which is that for something like this, done is never done. We're still evaluating the performance of individual categories through A/B testing, and we're also looking at secondary modes of browse, so that even though we've got rid of the world foods category, if you want to cook Mexican for dinner tonight, we're going to make that easy for you to do. Or if you want to eat paleo, go nuts. In the meantime, there are new product lines launching every week, and we really want to make sure that our principles are being adhered to and implemented and maintain the integrity of those categories so that in another 20 years, the PCS is still in good shape. Kia ora and thank you.